Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight in person and via Zoom. My name is Wilfried Seisler. I'm the Chief Curator here at Hillwood Estate Museum and Gardens in Washington, D.C. And I'm filling in tonight for our Executive Director, Kate Marquette, who unfortunately couldn't make it tonight, and she's very sorry to miss this wonderful program. As we begin, I would like to take a moment to gratefully acknowledge the Nacotchtank, also documented as an Anacostan, the Piscataway, the Pamunkey, the native peoples on whose ancestral lands Hillwood stands, as well as the diverse and vibrant native communities who make their homes near us today. I'm really delighted tonight to welcome you for this wonderful evening, which is our 10th annual Frederick Fisher Lecture. This lecture is named in honor of our Hillwood former director, Frederick Fisher, who served Hillwood for 20 years, from 1990 to 2010. And I understand that Fred and his wife Becky are joining us tonight virtually on Zoom. So hello, Fred and Becky. We are pleased to have you with us virtually tonight. For those of you who are actually joining via Zoom, please make yourself comfortable. No worries, no cameras, no microphones. But still, we would like to hear from you during the program. So please submit your questions when you think about questions during using the Q&A function in the Zoom menu. And at the end of the program, we will try to answer as many questions as we can from Zoom and also from the audience. For those of you in the theater, please do something I forgot to do. Silence your phone, so I will do you like in front of you. Here we go. Do the same, please. Thank you so much for your cooperation. Before we begin this evening's lecture, I just want to remind you that we are close to the Thanksgiving and holiday season. I cannot believe it, but it's true, it's happening already. And so you don't want to miss our wonderful holiday decorations. So please come back to see our wonderful trees in the mansion and in the visitor centers. They will be set up starting November 22nd. If you are not yet a member, and I know many of you are already members, please don't forget to join as soon as possible. So you will have the opportunity of joining us for our members' holiday open house on Tuesday, November 29. And you could have an opportunity to come see again or discover our wonderful exhibition, Grace of Monaco, Princess in Dior, which is on view until January the 8th. I also hope that you can join us this Friday, November 11th, for a Bountiful Harvest Virtual Floral Workshop. And if you want to learn more about our wonderful program, please check our website, hillwoodmuseum.org. So tonight, I'm thrilled to welcome Sarah Schleuning, the Margot B. Perrott Senior Curator of Decorative Arts and Design at the Dallas Museum of Art. Sarah will discuss the Dallas Museum of Art's exhibition Cartier and Islamic Art in Search of Modernity, which featured Marjorie Post's extraordinary emerald brooch that I hope you all know very well. The exhibition just closed in September, so no need to book a ticket to go to Dallas. But you will hear all about it tonight, and was co-organized by the Dallas Museum of Art and the Musée des Arts Décoratifs, the Decorative Art Museum in Paris, in partnership with the Maison Cartier. Sarah has a record of organizing thoughtful exhibitions and programs that are not only high profile and highly popular, but also recognized for their contributions to scholarship. She provides more than 2 decades of expertise in forming relationship with living designers and artists, bridging the gap between historical and contemporary design, and exploring how engaging with art and design can extend beyond the museum's walls. In 2021, Sarah co-curated the exhibition Cartier and Islamic Art in Search of Modernity, as well as electrifying design, A Century of Lighting. Past exhibitions also include Speechless, Different by Design in 2019, Iris van Herpen, Transforming Fashion in 2016, and Dream Scars, Innovative Design, Visionary Ideas in 2014. Please join me in welcoming Sarah.
Thank you very much. It's really such a pleasure for me to be here. I've never been here, so this is very exciting and had a wonderful, an electrifying tour this afternoon and was such a delight. So I want to thank actually everyone here at Hillwood for inviting me to come give this talk and being just wonderful hosts to me while I've been here. And also so thankful for the loan that they gave to this exhibition. So what I thought I would do is I would like you to buckle up because we have a lot of slides to get through in a short time. But I love to speak about ideas through visual objects. That's why I'm a curator. And so we're going to see a lot of great visuals, except for the first two slides. What I wanted to address just initially about this exhibition is a little bit of the context of, sort of who were our partners, where this took place. So as Wilfred said, this was a collaboration between the Musée des Arts Décoratifs with the Louvre as well and Cartier. There were 4 curators, 2 Islamicists and 2 decorative art specialists, 2 from the Dallas Museum of Art and 1 from MAD Paris and the Louvre. So it brought an incredible expertise and different points of view to the exhibition. We worked closely with Cartier, who opened their archives, their collection, and really allowed us. So I was the first curator that was brought on this exhibition, which was over 4.5 years ago. And so we have been mining these collections and looking at these ideas and really sort of thinking about these ideas for over 4.5 years. And then we were able to bring in, about 2 years ago, Elizabeth Diller, who's most known for doing the High Line, who did the exhibition design. And she and her team did an incredible collaboration with us, really, again, bringing in their own perspective. And so what you'll see in the slides is some of the installation views of the exhibition in Dallas as well. And I'll talk about their contribution as well. So this was a very fertile, creative collaboration that brought to fruition this project. Okay, this is my only slide with no pictures. But I thought instead of me saying this, we can zoom through this, but I wanted to give people the expanse of the show. So we had over 500 objects. They range from something from the 10th century to very contemporary, made 3 years ago. There was about 160 Cartier pieces. It's a mixture. So this show was a mixture of Islamic artwork, Cartier pieces, archival works, and a lot of pieces in between, which you'll see. And I think that's what made it this incredibly rich exhibition of looking at ideas and exploring ideas through a diverse kind of objects. So why this idea of Islamic art and Cartier? And you can start at the root of this is Louis Cartier's obituary from 1942, and I made super big the most important part of it, which really addresses that even in the headline of his obituary, it talks about how he was a collector of Islamic paintings and an expert of that. So even at his death, one of his most notable points was this collection he had and his passion and connoisseurship for Islamic art. And I think that really starts to tell you why this was a really rich idea. So the show itself is really exploring, I like to sort of drill it down in its most simplistic form to looking at color, style, motif, and form, and how that moves across time, geographies, and media. So that's really what we wanted to start the show about. And so you can see that Liz Diller and her team created this very spare tableau for us. And because we were coming right out of the pandemic, one of the things I wanted to do with this installation, I don't know if people saw the Paris setting versus Dallas, they were different in certain ways. But one of the things we wanted to do was really pull a lot of the text away from the objects and let the objects sit in these beautiful kind of monochromatic spaces that Liz and her team made for us, and really get people to look at art. The desire for people to become connoisseurs themselves. Instead of me telling you to see the motifs, you yourself finding those commonalities across them was a very powerful thing. So you can see the entrance of the show really brought in these 3 pairings. This was kind of the beginning, and we'll dive right into one of them. So you can see, now, granted, this is a PowerPoint presentation and not an exhibition, so the scale is inaccurate. So what you're looking at is actually a large box with this inlaid ivory, the one closest to me, and that is a box that was borrowed from the Louvre, but Louis Cartier in his personal collection had a piece very similar to it. And then here you see the Nécessaire by Cartier, and you can see very clearly the similarities of that central medallion and that drawing on that motif. Of course, the materiality is different, the use is very different, but it's very clear that there's a referential idea behind that. Similarly, looking at the bota pattern, this kind of teardrop shaped form coming out of India, and so you can see this scarf that we borrowed from the Met with this the shawl that has this bota pattern on it, and then you see it in the carved turquoise stones of the tiara. And lastly, this use of the finial form, which is that kind of flourish end to a calligraphic script, and you see that in the central part of the tiara, as well as this 10th century carved rock crystal. I can't remember a flask. It's a flask. It was like from Egypt. So again, the idea is really just to start looking to see how these things might have been sources of inspiration. And in the installation itself, it's a little bit hard to read, but you can see there's the flask and the tiara put together, and it's in a case that is has two clear walls. And so what you're looking into is actually the very last room of the exhibition. So when we get to the slide from the other end, you'll know I'm done. So just a little clue. But the idea was also that inspiration is cyclical. It's always looking back to look forward. And this is one of the themes, and what Liz Diller brought out in the installation is looking across things, looking backwards, looking around different sort of objects, because that's how we all absorb ideas. And the things that manifest themselves in the things we create as individuals often is built upon things we've experienced in our own lives. And that was very much this idea. So we wanted to start then again with a lot of kind of building layers of context. So this idea of direct connection. So empires are falling at the end of the 19th century in the East. Artwork is flowing through Europe, particularly Paris, which was one of the kind of central hubs of commerce. And this is it in the installation. But here what you'll see, these are three examples of early Islamic works that were coming through Paris. What's interesting in the show that started to also develop is how material is seen through different lenses. So what you see here, which is interesting, is you have this incredible rock crystal ewer. There's only 9 of these left in the world. And then you have these 2 portfolio plates. So these are drawings and illustrations of Islamic works that were then sold and distributed within Paris and Europe so people could see them. It's basically like a contemporary magazine or Instagram. So this idea of taking a 3-dimensional object, making it 2 dimensions, and that's actually how a lot of the designers were seeing them. And we'll see this throughout the show, the shift of the way ideas were disseminated, because photography, portfolios, and other things were a lot of the ways people saw the original artworks. And so what they see is a flattened version of the actual object, which is different than seeing the object itself. So these direct connections, you see this, and then you look, these are late 19th century pieces that were made in Paris, Baccarat, Theodore Deck, and you can see very literal interpretations. So you go back, can I do that? You back, and you can see we just made it out of ceramic, we just did that. So this is not what Cartier was doing, but this kind of sets the stage for what is happening in Paris at that moment. So just a very quick little idea of who Cartier is. So if you kind of start at the far end and move over, you have Louis-François Cartier, who began his career as a jeweler in 1847. 25 years later, his son Alfred in the center becomes his business partner. He has 3 sons, Louis, Pierre, Jacques, and a daughter who's never photographed in most of these things. At 23 in 1898, Louis becomes his father's partner. He suggests they move Cartier to where it is today at 13 Rue Le Pas, the center of fashion and jewelry. And then from there, they really kind of evolve into what we know as Cartier today. They developed under Louis, their own design studio, which is very seminal to the way Cartier evolves as a design studio and a jewelry house, a maison. They also think very much, they start to expand globally. So they move into London, which then Jacques runs, and New York, which the younger son Pierre eventually runs. There's Louis Cartier, and then eventually later we'll get to Jean Toussaint, who takes over in the 30s and really runs the house to the 70s. So this is your cast of characters. When I mention names, you now have a visual. So when you move through the show, what you see is what happens at the beginning of the 20th century. So Louis taken over the house. All of a sudden there's this new interest. Louis is looking for new styles. He's not interested in the Art Nouveau aesthetic that has come in. He becomes fascinated with this Islamic artwork that is coming in through Paris. And what you can see, there starts to be installations and exhibitions at the turn of the century. And this is a great example of the difference of what Cartier is doing. So you see here these two incredible Isnik plates, and in the center, you can see that this is a drawing by Charles Jacot, who was the head designer for Cartier for a long period of time in the early 20th century. He's drawing the rims of these plates. You see the top is the one at the far end at your left, I think, and then the right is the bottom. So instead of trying to make the piece for Cartier, they're studying the motifs and the forms, and they're really trying to figure out with the hand, how are these made, how do these interlock and intertwine, and how could that then manifest itself in something for Cartier. They're seeing these seminal watershed exhibitions like the 1903 exhibition at the Musée des Arts Décoratifs. And what we were able to show in the exhibition is not only some of the pieces that were exhibited there, so this is this phenomenal Hamburg Ewer, but the catalog of the exhibition with the same piece, which is from Louis Cartier's library. So Louis Cartier was buying these at the time of the exhibition, keeping them in his library, and they were accessible to his designers. So again, you see the difference, well, kind of how it could be in 2 and 3 dimensions, but this idea that the access and acquisition of the aesthetics of the ideas was something Louis was bringing into the house and having be part of what his designers were exposed to. This was a moment really when Islamic art was being codified as a scientific study. It develops as a field of study in the West and really becomes, and these shows, and particularly this was really one where people talked about their eyes were open to this kind of experience. They were starting to show them, particularly in the exhibition in Munich, with them on kind of white walls and clear spaces. This is another catalog from the 1906 exhibition, but what I wanted to point out very clearly with my red circle is this is from the Cartier archives. Those little hatch marks that you see is Louis Cartier pointing out what is interesting to him. That is for him and his designers to see. He is helping to articulate, I really like this form. Maybe this is for, something we could do with this. And you'll see these throughout a lot of the things in the archives, the touch of his hand. And that was part of what we were sort of tracing back. What was he looking at in these things? And where did that manifest itself in the works themselves? 1910, another huge exhibition on Islamic art that happens in Munich. We know that we believe probably Louis went there. We know that pieces that were shown there then later show up in the 1931 London exhibition, but the provenance has changed. Louis Cartier has acquired these objects, and he is now lending them under his collection name. So he's a connoisseur. He's developing his own eye, his own taste for these things, but he's not only is he sharing them with his designers, but he's sharing them out to the public. So there's incredible both curiosity and generosity that you see from him. Also, what's happening in Paris at the same time is the Ballet Russe is coming in, and you have this kind of evolution of what is probably not in French referred to as Persiamania, but we'll call it that for the sake of this talk. But this idea, this sort of infatuation and fascination with all things that. And you see, so 1904, there's the reissue of 1001 Nights. This is the Ballet Russe version, Scheherazade, and this is a watercolor illustration of the set design for Scheherazade that was done in 1910. Those colors are very clearly related to Cartier. you can see the deep blues, the greens, the turquoise, the blacks, the corals. You can see where we know Charles Jacquot and Cartier Louis were going to these ballets. They were taking their notebooks, they were writing things down. There was a clear interest, and the desire to find a new style was very clearly manifesting itself in this direction as a source. You see also things like Paul Poiret's fancy dress. So there's, again, it's in the zeitgeist of this moment, this fascination with all things that are kind of relate to this Persian aesthetic. So that kind of sets the stage for what is happening around the moment that Louis Cartier is really creating all these things in the early 20th century. So what we wanted to do with the exhibition was then select 4 what we called hero objects. And these objects talk about different ideas, but can clearly be rooted in sources of inspiration with Islamic art. And so these 4 objects are the 4 that were selected by the curatorial team. And what I'm going to show you is they were presented in Dallas in these little kind of immersive boxes. So you would be there with the object itself, and then there was a projection that was shown on the back. And what I'm going to show you and kind of walk you through, there were these animations that Liz Diller and her team made in collaboration with us. And what you can see, and what we could never do in simple wall text, is distilling this colonnade was taken from these colonnade of interior arches from the mosque. And you can start to see now how it's morphing into these forms. And you'll start to see the use of material. These are the diamond forms that are creating these arches. Those will fill the space. What was really fabulous about these is, one, they really break down the piece in a different way. They talk about the kind of architecture, the structure, the making of it. Although anyone from Cartier will tell you, you cannot watch this video and go home and make the piece yourself. This is not the true story of how to make them. But I think it really helps also break down the materiality. I mean, this bandeau is actually quite small. We can't put a lot of light on it because it's coral. So you're seeing this at a totally different scale, the way all these elements get pieced together and played. And then it makes the structure. And what you'll see in a few moments is that it will move from the 2 dimensions into the wrapping. But I love that you're able to really read those details. We did have to tell the designer, Jack, who was making this, to not make it so realistic. We had to dial it back a little bit. But I think it's really phenomenal. But you see that architecture and that structure, the colonnade, and then you'll see where this flattened thing now gets wrapped around to make this form around the body. So how it gets worn, how that scale has shifted into being a wearable piece of art. And here's the tortoise shell, which is, nature's thermoplastic material. And then you can see it rotate. And this also allowed us the flexibility to show from behind some pieces. So this happened with 4 pieces within the show, and beautiful detail of how this is pinned on to the tortoise shell. So I think it's really phenomenal to break down just a few of these pieces and really understand these ideas and see them in a different way. And again, this is the beauty of collaborating with other creative thinkers, because the architects saw more of the building structure of the piece, where we were talking about the ideas from them. And so we were able to combine those ideas into this singular presentation. But I think these were incredible experiences also for the visitor to really understand and attach to the ideas. So I think it's ramping up. Make us run over too long. But they're really quite magical, and then there's such a big scale. And but what I love, and what I think is always really important with things like this, it always brings you back to the real object, and then you're going back trying to understand the process. So that's the full loop. You come out of that into this big expansive space where we're talking about, again, all these influences and sources. And this next section is really about the library. This idea of so you can see behind you 2 of these animations that are running, and this spine running down of library books from Louis Cartier's collection. And so I'm just going to use one example that we used, but this is, again, looking at a different kind of source material where the designers were looking at. But you can see at the far edge of me, sorry, I'm not good with my left and rights, is Owen Jones' Grammar of Ornament. Owen Jones was an incredible British architect. So in the 1850s, he goes out and tries to codify and create this grammar of this language of motifs and pin them to different areas, and to create this true inspiration for art and really industry and commerce. And so you can see here, this is a plate of Arabian designs, and what you see next to it is a sheet of studies, of sketches, and you can pinpoint them to many of the pieces on from the Grammar of Ornament. So what you're seeing is, again, the designers at Cartier studying those motifs, trying to understand how they work and interlock, but as an exercise, just going over and over that. But where you see it manifested is in the rock crystal carving of this tiara, for example. So this is part of the kind of work we were doing curatorial, and it was almost archaeological, taking the Cartier piece and starting to go backwards to find the sketches and see where those sketches then attach. And so this is something that happened a lot in the show, kind of repeating this in different ways. Also, we tried to use these, and you can see this in the back here, we took certain artworks and blew them up at this macro scale. Showing a lot of jewelry and small objects is hard, especially when it's over 400 objects, so shifting the scale always helps, but it also helps you see details you cannot always see with the naked eye. Louis Cartier's personal collection, of course, was a huge source of inspiration for this. The two Islamic scholars really worked quite hard to help rebuild it, because it was dispersed at his death. And so they really worked with a lot of bills of sales and other things to figure out what was in his collection. And we showed examples of them. I want to talk for a second about the pen boxes, because they're interesting on a couple points. First of all, they were some of the first things Louis Cartier collected. You can see aspects of the motifs start to get iterated in other Cartier pieces as we go along. But what you're seeing in that kind of central pieces, photographs of the pieces. So what's interesting is everything that Louis collected, he had photographed, and those photographs were kept for the designers. They weren't insurance documents, or maybe they were, but they were also to inspire the designers to see these motifs and study them. This is the way, actually, that Judith Hanan from the Louvre was able to trace that the pen box that they acquired at the Louvre was originally owned by Cartier. Because they found a slip of paper in the pen box, they went to the archives, and they were able to find these photographs that were still in the archives and be able to trace that connection. You'll notice that the lower pen box is in the name of Shah Abbas, which of course is related to the jewel of the piece that we borrowed. This was he was a late 16th century, early 17th century Iranian and he was an active patron of paintings and book designs, and that was a very common practice to do these kind of poem-like inscriptions on artwork as a way to kind of articulate that they were precious objects and their level of importance. So you also have Jacques, the brother, who's running the London office. He goes off on an amazing trip to India. He comes back not only with photographs and other things that are left in the archives as well. He's really going to understand the culture, the market. He comes back with jewelry. There's even notes back to his brother and his father saying, I've been buying a lot of things. I don't know if you want them for the Maison or I'll keep them personally, but they're interesting to me. And this is a lot of what you see as the fluidity between what the Cartier family was collecting for themselves as personal interest, and then what was also going into the house as sources of inspiration. I included this necklace here because, of course, the pearl market was another big reason he was traveling, and the desire to tap in and really use that. Pearls were a huge part of Cartier sales, particularly in the early 20th century. He comes back with a tremendous amount of jewelry. These things immediately all get photographed, which is how we know what was there, but also travel around in a series of exhibitions that are in London and Paris, and then come to Boston and New York. By the time the exhibition of these works comes to Boston and New York, they're already creating new pieces. So they're not sort of lightly touching pieces that they were acquired on the trips and the travels, but in fact making new pieces because they're already creating taste for this, the ideas of these jewelries, these multiple strands, this kind of flexibility. And then things like the carved stones, which we'll see later when we talk about the Tutti Frutti and others, but you can see they're coming back and photographing all these materials, and this is how we were able to kind of trace some of this work that was happening and how much a part of the house it was. So the other thing we kind of wanted to talk about in this section is how they were transitioning with style. So what happens when you're moving from what they're most known for, which was the garland style at the end of the 19th century, and then trying to create a more modern style? Well, it doesn't happen overnight. You don't just immediately shift. And so this was a way to kind of talk about how they're working with both. If you look at the sketch, you can see this mixture of kind of garland style motifs and forms mixed with these heavy geometric forms that are taken most likely from pattern books on architecture and others. And if you look at those three, it's a hairpiece and the two brooches, you can see as early as 1904, 1902, these very modern looking forms that they're really playing with and trying to build an understanding of, to see how they work with the materiality, and also then build up a clientele who's interested in that. But at the same time, they're also making this amazing stomacher as well. So you can see they're playing with both. We wanted to explore this idea of kind of case studies. So we wanted to break this down more and really talk about the process. So the archives at Cartier were so excited because this was the most their work had ever been shown at any exhibition. But I think revealing the creative process is so important to understand where ideas come from and how they're actually the process of creation. So you can see here with this example, Louis Cartier had sort of this book of ideas. These are the sketches for this piece. You see how they're working out the ideas. Every piece that was made was then photographed, and then for a period of time in the early 20th century, they also made plaster casts. And the idea was there's a very different way you read the piece in 3 dimensions. You see the settings of the stones, the volume, versus the way you read it as a photograph flattened. And this combined together helped you see what the finished piece was and would help Cartier if they wanted to make it again, repair it, all those kind of documentation. But the fact that Cartier was documenting their pieces from the beginning at such a level is part of the way a project like this could happen, because we were able to retrace those steps, because a lot of this work doesn't exist anymore as an object itself. Because jewelry, as you know, it's highly likely a piece like this through the kind of evolution of the family got separated out as daughters took some for earrings, pendants, and others, and so the piece morphs. And this is a way to understand where that is. The kind of Islamic inspiration is this idea of this amulet form. So it was documented more as an escutcheon, which is sort of that center where the lock is and there's a medallion, but also is taken with that kind of amulet with the center stone and that shape around it. And then this is just, again, talking about how much of a form they were doing. So all these different sketches that you see about these kind of medallions or these pendants that would be in this geometric form, you can see tons and tons of tracings of ideas. They would then be selected, pulled out, and then maybe made into finished works. But what we wanted to talk about with all this material was just to talk about maybe there's only 70 pieces were showing of this, but they were producing or thinking about so many more. So that the objects that still exist today are just the tip of the iceberg of what is possible of what was being created or being thought about. So the main part of the exhibition was what we call this lexicon of forms. And I'm going to kind of just pull through these quickly because you're going to see so many different things. But it's really like a vocabulary with no grammar. And so I think about it also like a kaleidoscope. You have all these different ideas and these different motifs, and on different pieces, they're pulling different variants of it and exploring that creatively. So, and this is how we showed it in the exhibitions. We had these big floating things with the jewelry and then a lot of the ephemeral material below. But you have things like geometries, triangular forms. So we already saw that pulled out of that Algerian plate, but here you can see it as pendants. We showed finished works, we showed plaster casts of works. You see things like hexagons and octagons being the face plates of watches, of clocks, of pendants. And this is, again, the scale is unfair with the PowerPoint, but you can see just the level of detail and structure. But I love, this is a great example with this tiara where you see, typically this piece has been shown more by Cartier as an example of Art Deco and really these kind of pure geometries. But when you put it next to this facade of the Mushat Palace, it's very clear the reference of that and how that arcade and facade has been translated and morphed into this, this piece. In the exhibition, because Cartier works are so exquisite, you can show them from back and front and really start to see how these geometries play off each other. We have things like the mandorla, which is that kind of swollen almond shape. At the far end, you see a bronze Iranian flask with those forms, but here you see it as where the diamonds are. So these diamond shapes in this rolled iron tiara. You see drawings of that design. You see it as the finials. That shape becomes the finials of brooches. You have things like the cloud collar. So motifs don't always have to come just from the Islamic world. I mean, what happens with motifs is they move across geographies. So the cloud formation is really often attributed to the entrance to the celestial gate in Chinese culture. But it got picked up by the Persians. It was often used as the band or rim of ceramics as it kind of moved across. And then when Cartier was really seeing it was really as Persian material, as Persian motifs. And you can see that manifesting itself in various works shown up here. You have central medallions and brooches exploded out, oversized, moving outside the frame, putting big gems and hardstones in the center of them to change the way they look. So you have buckles and brooches, drawings for them. You have things like reciprocal patterns. So this idea of looking at the way the finials reciprocated on this textile, and that gets picked up on the edges of a vanity case or in this repeating pattern of this bracelet. Here's another version of reciprocal pattern, but here you see this is an architectural tile from the Louvre, so a piece that would have been shown, and there it is manifesting itself as the central part of a powder box in that drawing. You can see it's pretty, and then I love how then they work out how it works around the edges as well. Okay. Architectural forms really are quite prevalent in this. So you see works using these kind of brick forms to build up these armatures here with this tiara or these strap bracelets. So again, a lot of this stuff would have typically been called Art Deco, but when you really look at a lot of the brick patterns and works from the architecture, from the pattern books that we had, and you can see that here with like the Merlin form and this from this Grand Mosque of Cordoba, and you see those Merlin shapes at the top of that architectural facade mimic the same thing in this tiara. Well, it's the other way back. The arches that are seen, and what I love with this show and what we were really allowed to explore was also how deeply ingrained it becomes in Cartier. So it's not only in the jewelry and the kind of luxury objects, it's also in things like playing cards or their invitations. They're really looking at it as this incredibly rich kind of formation of ideas that they use to incorporate in a lot of the materials that they produce. You have the S shape, so this beautiful, so this is a ceramic that is from Louis Cartier's collection with this cloud motif, and then you see it in this great necklace. And what's funny about this necklace is most people always look at the emerald, so it's spectacular, but the S shape is really why we picked it for the show and really playing back with that idea. Another way we exhibited the work, so kind of these folding manuscripts. So this again is the Bota pattern. So here you see it again in the legs of the fabric, the pants in this great painting we borrowed from the MFA Houston. And then you see it in these formations of other click brooches and others. And this is, of course, related to you in a way. This is the first time this necklace was ever shown, but was Grace Kelly. had this, and actually Prince Rainier brought the stones to Cartier, and then he created that piece. So it's a really great, more modernized kind of look at a bota form. The cypress motif, which was a very important motif, kind of exhibiting immortality, was, you see that as in a central form in the plate, but then you see it, and what I love about these two examples is the shift from the very naturalistic sort of backdrop, really just kind of these cypress trees, to this very stylized geometry of the vanity case. So again, they keep playing with these, and the show wasn't really set up chronologically, but really sort of to drill down on these different motifs. We come back to the room that is really open and opposite the library room. So again, playing with how you're seeing things, looking at egrets, the role of the kind of turban ornamentation that comes from a lot of these illuminated paintings. And you can see advertisements for a Cartier piece, as well as an incredible egret with the purple heron feathers. Tassels, so this idea, and this is an early advertisement for Cartier where they're talking about how pearls are carried and sort of strung, and so it creates this kind of tassel formation, and then you see it in these long sauteurs of the 20s, and then it in diamonds another way. So again, how it kind of morphs and evolves. Of course, things like repetitive patterns and geometries, this looking at the arabesque, this kind of foliage and forms. And then you see it as more the pure geometries that really were being studied. And these are hand drawings by Charles Jacot, so you can tell he's just studying the geometries. How does that work? How do you make the repeat in that? Where is that repeat possible? Because these are often complex repeats that happen, and so he's trying to figure that out in drawing form, and then that's you seeing it over the surface and enamel of this small box. And then you have the final section, which is really looking at more techniques and materials. So we've kind of broke it down by motifs, and then we're trying to look at material and technique. So this idea of apres, of taking older works, fragments, elements of architecture or ceramics, and how they are reusing that onto Cartier pieces are exemplified here in this incredible little jade Persian cigarette case. That actually, when they open it up, is a cutout piece of a Persian miniature that they then just put the beveled glass on top. So really just literally taking an element to make that central medallion. You're seeing things like lightly touched Indian jewelry with these kundan settings that they just maybe change the clasps. So sometimes the changes are quite intense, and other times they're just as simple as somebody bringing their jewelry, like Prince Rainier bringing the stones and saying, please make something more modern or something different for this piece. You see the color, so we talked about that with the Sherazade, but here we tried to break it down and look at some really strong pieces that really break down these greens and these blues, how they're used, and then of course the blacks and the corals, and how those become really clearly identified with the Cartier language. The Colombian carved emeralds, of course, are a huge part of it as well. They exhibit them in the 1925 Paris exhibition, and that is, you can see the stall of that. But what I love is they also then in the kind of publication about this exhibition use these carved emerald pieces, this tiara and this neck piece and this brooch, as the graphic elements for the piece. So they're so strong both in their 2 dimensions as well as their 3 that they are able to incorporate them in that way. And then, of course, this is your piece, which I don't need to say a lot about, but again, what's interesting is, and I wanted to include this with these images because this is a choice. This is one of the questions I got asked a lot about with the exhibition. We did not focus on who were the patrons of these pieces. One, there's been a lot of Cartier shows that have dealt with that issue, but also there were so many rich ideas that wasn't so much a part, but I thought because I was coming here, of course, these are great. How can you not? But incredible ways to also see the scale. And so we were, the shoulder brooch pendant was a huge showstopper for us, and we were so appreciative to have that. But again, coming back to that main central stone does have the carved element on it, which you can see, which is related to the inscription that was on the pen box as well. So again, very similar ideas, and you can see stones that are reused and remade into new, more modern forms. That use of carved stones, of course, becomes part of the iconic Tutti Fruttis, but here mixing more than emeralds, using sapphires and rubies as well to make these incredible, bountiful sort of pieces. And then as you kind of move, these are now moving into the Jean Toussaint era, so the mid-20th century. You have things like pieces with this huge massing of beads that really was inspired by a lot of Indian jewelry, this kind of massing of forms. You have things like bib necklaces and forms, and here you see them, and it's great. And a lot of these could be used in multiple ways. So this, the bib necklace is closest to me was owned, of course, by Elizabeth Taylor, but also could be a tiara if you wanted it to be as well. And when you see these two together, you really see, again, this strong triangular form. So if you think about that back to what we looked at with the Algerian thing, and this was also paired with, so this is in the 1970s, this influence of hippie chic, again, where this intersects with the contemporary moment. So you're taking ideas and inspiration of sources. The Cartier designers are constantly mining also their own archives, their own materials they've made, as well as their own library of resources and references. And here it's manifesting itself more in this hippie chic form than it was in the earlier 20th century. And then here we are, as I promised, at the end, near the end. But this is the very last gallery, which was really talking about the 21st century. And so you're looking back, because of course you look back to look forward. So you're looking back at where you began, but you're looking at examples of 21st century pieces that are being made, still drawing on these ideas. So far left, you have a very contemporary version, sort of the tutti frutti, that idea of the strands of different colored stones. The brooch closest to me is of course elements of a prey that have been reused and modernized to a 2015 piece. This is an incredible piece that really talks about these geometries and these hexagons. And I'm going to move us past it because I'm going to show this video. But this was the one piece where we really talked about the body. So this was the very end of the show. And in a second, I'm sorry, we had to do this with our cell phones. You're going to see it breathe. So what happens is here you're looking at it flat, so you're really reading it. And here you'll see it raise up. And this is one of the things that's so hard with installations, particularly with diamonds, because you can't get the light to move on them, and you can't get that liveliness, that sparkle that comes from that. And so this was the last piece in the show, really talking about how these things sit on the body and how they change their shape and form on the body themselves. And I think it was really powerful to sort of do at the end, and then you start to rethink all those other pieces that you saw in the exhibition. And then we ended the show with drawings, because what we were interested in was, again, reinforcing this idea that creation is still happening, making is still part of what is the process today, and you're seeing incredible works that continue to draw on the past as they move forward, because creation and inspiration is cyclical, but it's also both evolutionary and revolutionary. And all those ideas, as I hope you've seen through this talk, are really, again, back to that central idea of looking about how, color and form and style and motif is moving across these geographies and time and media. And I think this was an incredible show to really, what we hope is to spark a new generation to think about where ideas come from and how they can manifest themselves in new ways as we experience them today. So I want to thank all of you for listening to me. And I came in under time. They didn't think I would, but I managed to do it.
Thank you for the spectacular talk, Sarah.
I think we have some questions that are coming.
Hi, thank you for the spectacular talk, Sarah. As we move to the Q&A portion of tonight's lection, for those at home and in our theater, my name is Suleikin, and I am the disembodied voice coming from the AV booth who will be moderating our online chat. My friend Alex is inside the theater with a microphone that she's going to pass around. After, please raise your hand for any questions you may have. And after you've asked your question, please pass the mic back to Alex so she can get to the next person. Now, our first question is going to come from the chat from Phyllis and Glenn Gerstel. They're asking about the wonderful animations that were on your slide, specifically the tiara one that was inspired by the mosque walls. And they are wondering if they are available anywhere online and if there is also a catalog of the exhibition that they might be able to see.
Are they available online? I am not sure. That I would have to find out. They are proprietary as part of the exhibition. I think they might be. I can find that out. But they were created, like I said, by Liz Diller and her team with us, and I do think they are really quite phenomenal. And there is a catalog of the exhibition, and I think it might be sold out. It's been very soon, but I heard maybe they're reprinting it. But if they are, I encourage people, because the catalog is really this deep scholarship into these ideas, and each of the 4 curators really dived in to different themes that we couldn't do in the show. As you can tell, we tried to already pack a lot into the exhibition.
We have an audience question right here.
Thank you. I was wondering if you could tell us any more about the piece from our collection, where the emeralds came from. Are they from India, as I've been told? And if things from India are truly Islamic, or are they other designs that are incorporated? Thank you.
Well, it's part of the Mughal Empire, which is considered part of that umbrella of of what we call Islamic art. So we talk kind of in this big, I think one of the challenges, if I may veer off your question a little bit, one of the challenges with this show is you're talking often about historic terms. I mean, of course, a lot of the material that was looked at the early 20th century is talking about Musulman, which is a term for Muslim, French, Persian, and others, and we're in the 21st century sort of talking about it as this broader umbrella of Islamic art. And of course, the Islamic world has moved and shifted over numerous centuries as well. But at a period of time under the Mughal Empire, that was sort of considered part of that. And so my understanding is those emeralds are from that, and they are these carved emeralds that were carved under that time period. But your own curator might know more than me about that. I was in charge of 500 objects, so I would use your own local resource more than I would me, but yes, that's my understanding.
Okay, I'm going to come to the other side of the room. Yes. First question right here.
Okay, so in the late 19th, early 20th century, there were the 3 brothers, and one was in New York, one was in Paris, and one was in London, and their stores were kind of, from what I understand, pretty separate. Was the Islamic influence in jewelry stronger in one of those branches, or was it kind of throughout the 3? So
the way it evolves is, and again, we're looking backwards to sort of build this narrative, but Louis, who runs the Paris branch, all roads lead to Louis. So he really set the sort of aesthetic tenor of them. What you see is each, London versus New York has different markets and different interests and different things happening. So London in particular had a much bigger connection to India, which makes sense. New York really got more into the sort of jazz age, sort of that art moderne period that really takes over New York and American design of that time period. So you see evolutions that way, but the kind of aesthetic driver was Louis. And what's interesting, even in doing went to all three of the archives because they have their own archives, although it's mainly centralized in Paris. There are copies of a lot of these photographs and elements that are in all three. So this stuff was also getting disseminated out. That's part of the photographic record and track, was that they were being kept in many of these places to be studied and done. But Paris was really, and you see, you'll see that in some of these, you know, they'll talk about which branch it was sort of designed at or made from, but they really did communicate quite well through that.
Okay, we have another question right here.
So this exhibit zeroed in on the Cartier family. Were there other jewelry design houses that picked up on this and also innovated in this way?
Yes, so I mean, this idea that, I mean, again, that's part of why we tried to set the stage with sort of what was happening with these exhibitions and others. So Henri Viver was was a great jewelry designer who had a big collection as well. His jewelry is, you know, again, how the creators then make these pieces and how they manifest them show up as different in their aesthetics. So Viver's pieces are very different from Cartier's. I think for us, what we were really looking at was how, for Cartier, it evolved over such a long time period and starts to sort of do these iterative variations of them as it evolves. But certainly, you see in that, and that's why we showed fashion and other designers as well, you see other people at the time being inspired by these ideas and making them. So Cartier wasn't working necessarily in a vacuum, but it was what they really took as this extreme source of inspiration. And again, what we tried to do with the show was really talk about all the different fronts it was happening on. So you have them collecting works and really becoming connoisseurs of that, of the works themselves. You have them traveling and experiencing stuff. You also have them collecting this archive of pattern books and photography, as well as then it's manifesting itself both in the works they're making, whether it's après or completely new works, but also in the graphics and other things. So it really became one of the houses, at least that, from my point of view, that really fully attached to it in a very deep and meaningful way, and still is a part of their identity today.
Any other audience questions? Yes. Come over to the other side.
You did a beautiful job just revealing the object, and in such an innovative way to display jewelry. So thank you. Okay.
I'll take the compliment. You can say it again.
I had two questions. So one about Poiret, who I believe married into the Cartier family, or there's, but I also wanted to ask, as the Cartier style evolved from the garland into the Art Deco style, you see how the cuts of stones evolved too, and they became bigger and longer, and you have the introduction of the emerald and the baguette cut. Was Cartier pushing the lapidaries, or were they being sort of informed by these new cuts of stone and ways to cut stone?
Well, I will tell you truthfully, gemology, and that is not my specialty. So I don't fully know. What I do know, I mean, again, is all of this stuff is happening together. So I think the danger, and I think you raised this a little bit with your question, is we're showing this as if it's in a vacuum, but in fact they're not. So the cuts of stones are changing because, I mean, you look at diamond, I mean, when Cartier, for example, is trying to make historic additions or to pieces that are historic pieces, they have to look for different cuts of diamonds because it's changed in the 1950s to what we kind of know about today. And so in fact, one of the animations, which I didn't show, they talk about that, and in fact, a lot of the diamonds look yellow and are different shapes because that was not a big deal at that moment, but it would be today. So this is all evolving, but what I don't know, which is the question, is how much they were pushing that or involved in that, or how much that was happening in tandem, and I don't know that, so I'm sorry, but I'm sure it was interrelated because all those things become it's what they can acquire, what they're getting, and what they're also looking for.
Thank you, Sarah. So we only have, unfortunately, enough time for one more question, and I'm going to take from our chat. Chris B is wondering, as they picked up older design inspirations and used that in the new products, were those products primarily marketed to US and Europe clientele, or were they just as likely to sell those new designs back to the regions that are credited with creating the original source designs?
All of the above. They're equal opportunity.
All right, well, thank you, Sarah. And on that note, I would like to say thank you again for this incredible lecture.
Thank you so much.
I hope everyone tonight gets home safe and has a wonderful evening.
Plans for the exhibit to travel around the state?
Not in the United